Hello, everybody. We've been kind of chatting about where to with our episodes because we are listening to what our listeners are giving us feedback about. We're also involved in clinics of our own and mentoring other staff, and we are experiencing people kind of grappling with some of the underlying principles of the treatment interventions that we provide. So we thought we'd start to explore some of these principles and phrases that get thrown around a lot just to make sure that we have a really clear and precise understanding of what these terms mean. So we hope that's helpful. If you've got any phrases that you'd like us to chew over, send it all in on the various mediums platforms and let us know what you're eager to hear about. So what I was eager to discuss today is this concept or the principle of follow the child's lead, which we hear a lot in various approaches that we use, like DIR floor time and sensory integration from AIRS. Being the theorist that I am, I was like, where did this come from? Who invented this or put this phrase together? And, how has it come to be in OT? And not just OT, I know speeches use it, and it's across various models that are multidisciplinary. So, that was my little itch I wanted to scratch that may or may not be helpful for other people. But I kind of wondered, how did this become a really common phrase that we use? And what actually is it? What is it and what is it not? And how do we make sure that we are using these principles in a way that have some integrity and validity and that are helpful in either the assessment or intervention phase? As you know, we're all a bit eager to be precise and effective in our assessments and our interventions. So here we go, trying to be precise about this phrase, follow the child's lead. Corey, Trace, how's this sync up for you, this idea of follow the child's lead?
So I was thinking about it as you were talking and thinking about the first time that I ran into like a really sticky moment actually related to this idea of follow the child's lead. So it's kind of a funny story that I feel like I want to share right now. I had this mentor.
I'm going to follow your lead, Trace.
Okay.
Go for it.
So I had this mentor for a number of years when I was doing research, and this person didn't fully understand the work that we do in occupational therapy, but did a lot of training around working with kids, especially kids that were quite complex. And this person said, OTs are always just following the child's lead and they're just following the child around the room. And you really shouldn't commit to that kind of theory or that kind of therapy because it just does no good. Like, why would you just follow the child all the way around the room? And I kind of chuckled. And then I said, well, I don't exactly know, like the therapist you've been watching or whatever. And I can tell you that this is a very misunderstood and easily goes astray concept. So the idea is never to follow the child around, but the idea is that your mind is attuned to what the child is interested in their own development internally. So it's this very intersubjective understanding of following the child's lead. It is not a literal following the child's lead. And so as I said that, this person paused and said, I just thought you were playing. I didn't know you were thinking about the mind and all of these things. So it was just a hilarious moment where I kind of felt like, to the naive observer or to the novice interventionist, this is a very elusive concept. And it's one that I think deepens almost every day you practice for the rest of your practice, is learning how to deeply attune to what is the child's system, their body, their mind, their curiosity, their actual developmental trajectory. What is it that it needs? And so I often change the phrase from follow the child's lead to follow the child's need, because I want the clinician, especially, and also parents and educators and others that we're helping to deepen our connection with kids as a conduit of helping them. But I want people to tune into that level and understand that if a child's body looks like it is moving a lot, that isn't sensory seeking, that's telling you something. And if you tune into it, you'll get the right message and you'll know exactly what they need. And as you follow that lead, that need, you make progress so much faster and in more authentic, richer, deeper ways than if you contrive goals that are to try to accomplish a developmental checklist of some kind.
Mm.
So this idea of following the lead, it can feel slippery and elusive, and it can make it look as if you're just sort of meandering, but you're not. And I really am so excited to talk about this more from a clinical perspective and think about the struggles we've each had in learning this principle and in embracing it and in helping it to come to life in our sessions, but then what we learn from it. So anyway, I just remember feeling so confronted by this person and then kind of realizing, wait a minute here, just back up a little bit because you're not getting it. And as soon as I stepped into, I get it, wow, that was kind of cool to realize that there is, it is a principle, it's a foundation, you know. And so anyway, I don't know what that's a funny story in a way that's just a sort of personal for me in terms of deciding that this is worth owning, you know?
It's very classic of you, Tracy, in my mind, around making a abstract and not well understood principle clear in terms of refining the way that you actually define the term so that the person that you were talking to could understand the actual clinical skill that you were using in doing that as part of your intervention. In terms of your question around where did the follow a child's lead term come from, Michelle, I have absolutely no idea. I hear it a lot in a lot of different spaces. But I don't know where it came from. So maybe anybody, I don't know if you know either, Tracy, but anybody, if you do know, or maybe it comes from many places, and that's one of those things that every different place it comes from thinks that it came from there and actually just came from many places kind of all around the same time. But I'm super keen to talk about it in reference to what we do just in treatment as well, because I can distinctly remember watching a video, and I wish I could remember the context in which I saw this video, but I can't. I think the affective shock of the video is the only thing my brain has remained holding on to. But I know that I was watching this video in the context of following a child's lead, and this is an old video, thankfully. And this person, I don't know what profession they were. I didn't hold on to that information, but they were a clinician of some form, and they were talking to parents, and they were working with this child in this video. And she was like, you got to follow the child's lead, which in this video meant she just had the parents and her copy everything that the child did. And the child was on top of an exercise ball. It wasn't a very big exercise ball, but literally on top of the exercise ball, grinding his pelvis into the exercise ball. So she had the parents and her get on top of an exercise ball and do the same movements and motions as the child. And I remember at the time, this was a number of years ago, being like, I don't think that's following a child's lead. I just remember being like so shocked that that was the thing that this person was suggesting that was following a child's lead. And I was like, that's not right. But I didn't have the language to be like, explain that in any way like you could, Tracy, to your person. And I didn't have the possibility even to talk to this person. I was just watching a video, but I just remember being absolutely gobsmacked that that was what was being suggested as following a child's lead. Because in my mind, I was like, you're literally just copying the child and there is no change in the behavior. So that to me is not like, that's not following their lead, that's copying them. And yes, I will copy children if it creates a change in the behavior that was a more adaptive, you know, like if it allowed for something to emerge for that child, if that was useful for me to copy what they were doing and it allowed me to achieve more synchrony with the child in some way, that then promoted connection or whatever. But if I'm literally just following the child around and copying everything they do and nothing emerges from that, then that's not following a child's need. That's just literally following them around, like you said, Tracy. And no wonder this other person was like, you're just following them around. We don't know. And I know early on, you know, in treatment, sometimes you feel like, you're like, oh, I just feel like I'm chasing this child. I don't feel like I'm getting into something deeper here. And so, yeah, I think in those moments, it's trying to step back and say, well, what is the need that maybe I'm missing in the way that this child is engaging in the world, you know, and how what I'm doing is maybe not meeting that, and then I'm not able to sort of support the way that the development's emerging in a certain way.
Right.
But I know, Michelle, you've just like sort of been diving into the DIR world a little bit more recently. So did you have any, I don't know, epiphanies around this space, or what about you?
Epiphanies, wow. What I'm doing two things that has it front of mind at the moment. I'm working with some OTs that are kind of getting the next level of experience and embodiment about what this means. So I'm trying to really show videos and pause and go, well, that, you know, this is some decision making that underlies what's happening here. I have been deep diving into DIR. And I guess what it brought to the fore for me is that it's this kind of backwards and forwards, in and out experience for me, where at times I'll be watching a child. So I assessed a child last week, and kind of how this played out was me trying to observe the child, and they were a bit jumpy around the room. They were having 30 seconds here with one activity, one toy, and then moving on. And so I did sit back and watch. They were really tentative to me, and the whole family was there. And so I thought it was a really nice way to let that child settle into the room when they had been really not interested in me. There was no eye gaze at the start, and you know, they were skirting around from me. They're only really young, under 2. So I thought, I'm just really going to sit back, answer mum and dad's questions. There was a sibling playing, and I was watching to see all the, you know, the little things that they were doing, how they were picking up things, how they were moving away from their sibling when they were too loud, how they moved to keep their head in upright all the time. So I guess that was part of the idea of, I was watching and making some assessments about what was happening and trying to kind of clinical reason what was happening for that child, that helped me understand what the gaps were, I guess, and what the need was. So then I did get involved when I thought they looked more positive and playful, that I was going in and trying to join them in play and have, you know, some shared attention. So it was a bit more parallel play, and I was copying them at the start. You know, they were banging on a thing, so I was banging on a thing and seeing if, you know, they looked at me or looked at the object I was banging, so they knew that I was in their space or not. Then I tried to kind of turn take and see if I can have their hammer, you know, and then they moved away. So it was like, okay. So then it was back into my brain. Like I was trying to be really present, but it was this process of watching, moving in and intervening based on that clinical reasoning that I'd done, testing something out, and then, you know, seeing what happened then. And in this case, the child moved away. And so it was like, right. Then I kind of came back and gave them space, watched and saw what they were doing and thought, right. In my mind, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to come at it differently this time. And so I'd move in and, try to engage with him in a different way. But for me, it was this, it just felt like when I'm thinking about this concept, there was a real active and passive components to it, where I was more really watching and trying to make sense of, what was happening for them, clinical reason, make decisions about what I was going to do, and then get really kind of more involved and active, and then coming back, and doing that again, testing it out, making a theory, planning an action, doing it, and then seeing how it would unfold. And if it was positive, you keep doing that again. It was like, right, I'll keep going. That's working. It's more adaptive. They're more engaged with me now. They're more masterful in the object they're playing with, or, playing it in more complex ways. And then when it didn't, it was like, okay, I got to come back and, in that session in my mind, go, right, okay, plan B, what's happening now? So for me, it's both a process and it's just me in and outing. That is not a proper term.
No, it is a process. You're following the lead, but you're also kind of, so there's a few things that you're following within the lead, right? So first, for all of the theories, and we can talk about this maybe in another episode as like a foundation, but that is that if the child is a bit more regulated and engageable or engaging in anything, whatever that happens to be, following that lead is really different than if they're more disrupted or struggling or dysregulated. And following that lead is also really different. So one of the things that we have to situate in our clinical approach is really meeting the child and helping to hold the space regardless of sort of what that foundation is. But then we're always having in our mind and in our felt experience of having that sense of the we space, as Dan Siegel calls it, right? Regardless of whether the child's more regulated or dysregulated, the level of the us being with is a part of following the lead. So even if the child is quite hesitant or remote or unfamiliar with us, we're going to be very respectful and aware of their edges and boundaries and openness to us, or worry about us, or any of those things that may be going on for them. But what we're doing is we're looking for what is of interest in pulling them into any level of engagement, into any level of glimmer, of any level of repetition of an action that was meaningful, whatever that happens to be. And what we are doing in our mind is suspending our clinical reasoning so we can just stay wholly present and be with. We might be watching and waiting and wondering, as some of the DIR or language models might say. We might be offering an opportunity and then waiting to see what happens. We might be joining them. And I want to mention a little bit about this idea of copying, just to get us all thinking about that in the same way. So we all know that if we copy each other in a way that's not tuned in, it feels super yucky, kind of creepy almost. So when we're talking about meeting the child and following their lead and being with them and joining them, and we might repeat actions that they're doing, and it can look like we're repeating them, we're copying them. But when we do it in this follow the child's lead kind of way, we're super attuned to the fact that we're creating a shared MUI space, that we're intersubjectively sharing a moment and an experience. And so it isn't that we're putting something on the child, we're not copying them in a way that feels like we're mimicking them or even distal from them. Because if you copy without that affective sharing, it feels really not great to any of us. So there's this affective connection that underpins the following the lead. That's really instrumental in this whole process. And I think we want to convey that to everyone listening, that it's really about, in the space of connection, we're tuning into what the child is interested in, what their system is interested in. And we're building that through the being with them and participating with them. And that's really what we're trying to go after here. And it can feel so subtle to use all those words that I just said to actually do that. But so it isn't ever just following their lead. It's deeper than that.
Yeah. And I think, Michelle, what you were describing, I picked up the fact that you were following their affective lead, particularly around safety and not safe. And for whatever reason, that created a sense of, a withdrawal for that child. You then followed their lead around the affective cues and the way that they remove themselves from that instance to know, okay, that's not where things are at for you. And then I think you've, like, it sounded like you then pulled the appropriate response as the therapist around, okay, I follow that lead. And now I'm going to take in your need and create a new hypothesis around what other ways might we create a we space
experience.
And then you would, in the assessment, go and test the new possibility for seeing any particular skill that you were looking for that child, so because he was little, you might have been looking at any sort of shared attention or sustained reciprocity. You could have been wondering about posturally, if I'm in his midline, if I reduce the praxis demand, does that change the way that he shows up and how he enjoys the interaction we space? You were just picking up the hammer and banging it on an object just in the hope that maybe he'd noticed you. I'm guessing. You can tell me if I'm wrong at any point here, Michelle. But like, if you were coming in and he's exploring a quality, an affordance of something, and he's banging a hammer on a particular object for whatever reason, he's engaging in that. And so if I was in that situation, I would really step into my curiosity around, like, I can see you're doing that and I'm interested in that too. Yeah, I'm going to bang it in the same way. Like, what do you think? It's like a really intentionally, I'm trying to step into the mind of the child and then wonder if that will catch interest to their nervous system. The fact that I'm interested in the experience that they're interested in. And then, if I can pull that in, if that does create that, then I can be curious around the possibilities of that object with them. And then they might take on some of the things that I am wondering about as well in that space. Or they might be like, no, mate, I'm not ready to do what you're doing. I need to do what I'm doing. And so then it's, again, okay, I got to follow your need in exploring this object in this particular way, rather than me wanting to expand the way that you're exploring the object. So again, for me, it's always a wondering around, what offering do I put out there that is taken up for them, and what offering therapeutically, because the offering I'm talking about is, because I am a little bit greedy sometimes in terms of wanting change in how the child makes progress, I'm always wondering about what's that next slightly emerging skill. What's the next little thing that might be coming available for that child, and how could I offer something in the interaction, in the activity, in the predictability, in the novelty, in the whichever toolbox I'm going to pull from, in the sensation. I'm coming back to my step SI probably there. And I'm then seeing if that is taken up by the child. And that's me following their lead. So if I put the offering out around the curiosity of, I'm going to bang it this way, and they don't take that up, then I'm not going to be like, no, we bang it like this. I'm not going to expect that they do it the way that I'm hoping they will do it because that's the next step developmentally. It's like, okay, that wasn't the way to achieve that particular unfolding or whatever. It's either they're not ready for that or that just wasn't the moment to see if that skill or capacity might emerge. So you definitely weren't passive. I knew what you were trying to describe, but I was like, you're not passive, Michelle. You're very active through the whole process.
Yes, that's right. But I kind of was sitting there, and I guess I think every time we have a new client, new family come in and observe us, I have that idea, Tracy, that, what happened to you? It's like, well, you're here to assess it and get on the mat, get over there. For me, for the child, I saw him doing a wide skirt, moving away from me. So my choice then was not to get engaged. My choice was that he needs space, and then I'm going to try and signal safety through his co-regulators. So I'm going to engage with his younger brother and his parents and have them engaging backwards and forth with me and feeling safe, and him observing that, so that he's like, okay, my co-regulators, my people think she's all right. So I kind of went through his people to go, yeah, she's okay. I actually think he was picking up those cues that the parents and child was starting to send about, she's all right. She's all right. She's reliable and trustworthy, and she's going to be all right. And then I went, to try and engage with him. My first step was that, engage effectively with him. And it happened to be that he was playing with a thing. So it was around the thing. He moved away. So then my next thing was around, okay, maybe space is a thing for you. So I'm going to try and engage with you across space and not get too close. And then we'll try that again. But he'd moved on to another item. So whilst he had things going on, my wondering was, how do you relate to people? How are you engaging with people? Firstly, it was a space dimension I had to think about. And then it was all my affective tools, my voice. Did I use a voice? Did I not? My face, my hand motions. I tend to be bigger effectively. So it was like, right, tone yourself down, Michelle. But for me, it's just suspending the action while I kind of test some things out and gather some information and then test something out. So I'll look more like I'm in action. Sometimes, when they're better regulated and have higher capacities, it's a lot more fluid and you're in it and you're making those moment-to-moment decisions, like you said, about what does a child need? Do they need to firm up that foundational level of, regulation, engagement, connection, or do they need to firm up their praxis skills or, whatever it is? But when they've got lower capacities, then I'm a lot more watching and moving slower and backwards. And I do feel like I kind of need to take time.
Yeah. I also think that there's this beautiful thing that's happening for clinicians where you're always ever present with the child. Even when you give space and you're over talking with the sibling or the parent, you're intentionally kind of still anchoring yourself as an available source of information and regulation and curious things that might happen, maybe joyful exploration. But you're really gently following, how does that child's affective system respond to all of that? And I think we always keep that sense of, I want you to feel awesome and safe and regulated here. This is a really good place, and I'm going to be a source of that for you. And so we have to stay like really present and attuned to pick up on the little subtlest things that might indicate their own interest and wonder in the world. And sometimes that can be very fleeting for some of the kids that we work with for a variety of reasons. I think what happens is, as soon as we meet that little person for their wholeness and what is their little nervous system telling us, we do have this ability as clinicians to be fully present with that child and available, but also we're with our clinical mind. And in our clinical mind, we're kind of nominating candidate, opportunities, like you mentioned, Corey, with the STEP SI. Like, here's the things I might be able to hook on to here to create a different experience for us together in this moment. But we're also kind of going through candidate wonderings around, why is development so sticky and tricky for this kiddo? As we're watching, we pick up on the subtle cues of what the child needs related to what their nervous system needs, in terms of maybe they just need a little bit more information about the affordances of the bangables so that that can turn into a richer action. Or maybe they need a little bit more sound quality from the bangables because resonant vibration is really anchoring them in space. Or maybe they need that synchrony of exchange to happen so that the social space starts to be more available to them. So, in our minds, for a child at the developmental level you're at, we start to construct like mini hypotheses across these different developmental functions where we're wondering, where's that just right opportunity for this child? And so in the AIRS framework, the follow the child's lead is connected to the just right challenge, because you're helping to create that opening to adaptation through really tuning into where they're at and what's interesting and appealing to their little wholeness. And then what does that bring about for them? But if we don't have that idea that it could be social, or it could be in the affordance space and sensory discrimination or praxis functions, or maybe it's really around how they're regulating themselves and finding themselves in this space, or maybe it's about how they're finding their body and their posture. So in this way, knowing a field of thinking like the spirit gives us in the spirit tool, it gives you a way to kind of dance through in your mind and wonder in a way that is informed. So your curiosity is both wholly present and simultaneously informed clinically. And those two things together are really what guide you in following the child's lead.
I was smiling because you moved into the question I had, Tracy, which was, I wonder how Dr. Ayres thought about following, like how she intended that. You went right there, and I was like, I didn't even have to ask it. But it did make me wonder about following a child's lead in regards to the affordance exploration component of treatment, because this is really hard. So what I mean by that is, if a child is repetitively lining up some toys, or repetitively tapping or banging or shaking objects, and as a therapist, you don't quite understand why that particular behavior is occurring, like for what function is that occurring, you feel sometimes like you're not sure how to support the child in the moment that you see those behaviors. So I know we've talked about, well, not on the podcast, but I've talked about with you, Tracy, the affordance of that activity for a child. But I think it would be so helpful to talk about that here together, because it's really confusing, and it's taken me a long time to understand what on earth I still don't fully understand affordances, but I'm a lot further along that line now than I was, and it has been incredibly helpful for my treatment. So I wonder if we could chat about that.
Yeah, so I think it's a really important one to talk about in the space of following the child's lead, because if you just copy the child and do that rotely, it's often super unproductive and can actually be almost kind of unkind at its worst. So, how I'm putting that in parallel to this is that if you have a child who's doing any of these repetitive things that any of us might do, and truthfully, we all do repetitive behaviors for different reasons at different times. But if a child is a little bit sticky on it, they're repeating and then they're repeating again and then they're repeating again. I think you do want to notice what it is that they're deriving from it. And sometimes we have to be willing to get it wrong. We will get it wrong sometimes when we nominate these hypotheses in our minds. And that's okay, like to give ourselves space to sort it, because sometimes it's a little bit more complex than it might appear on the surface. But the other thing is that we know that the primary drivers of most of these early kinds of behaviors in kids is either to help themselves feel organized and support their regulation, or it could be that the information is not connecting in a way that builds to the next block of information. And that would be more when we think about the affordance of an object as having properties that give rise to skillful interaction at whatever level that might be. And for a lot of kids who struggle with that aspect of more of a perception based issue, is that the perceptual qualities in and of themselves are interesting, separate from the relationship that those perceptual parts have to the object itself. And so in our brains, we construct wholes and parts and deconstruct whole to part relationships all the time. But for a lot of kids, they don't do that easily or fluidly. So if you look at a vehicle and it has wheels, you think of it as its representational things. It's a car or it's a train, and that has a representational nature to it. You've learned it through language, through deferred imitation, through memory and meaning that's been infused to you from people, from books, from the environment, from experience, and all of that, but it's representational. And a lot of our kids are operating at a level that's below representational thinking. And so when you look at a car, you can't not see it as a car. But a kiddo who doesn't have representational thinking, they may not see it as a car. They may see it as a flat thing that has round things on it. And the truth is that that's oddly curious, that a flat thing can have round things attached to it. Like, that's weird, kind of. It's almost like gravity is like a property. If you have a thing in your hand and you let go of it, it should fall. And if it doesn't and it floats, you would look at it forever, and you would never stop looking at it because it's defying a property, an affordance that is expected. And so a flat thing with round things attached to it is a bit odd. Also, those round things happen to move, which is intriguing. And you might get stuck on the relationship between the flat and the round. You might get stuck on the fact that the wheels turn. You might get stuck on a shininess to one part versus the other part. So these perceptual qualities for kids who don't have representational thinking are loud for them. They really are interesting to them. And they're often repeating things in that space to try to make sense of them in a non-linguistic way and in a non-representational or symbolic thinking way. And so this is a space that a lot of our kids get stuck in. And in that, we have to follow their lead. We can't say, well, just jump up here to representational thinking with me and let's play trains, because they're not thinking of it as a train. They're thinking of it as a weird flat thing with round things that move.
Yeah, I can talk about treatment for this as well to make this a bit more tangible. He's only young and he has a genetic disorder is what his official diagnosis is, but he doesn't have language. So it's interesting. I mean, that helps in the way that you can't really go super representational, although we still try, right? So like he'll be interested in the wheels or the whatever, and you'll be talking about the bigger object that he's interacting with, not the thing that he's actually moving. So he's picking up the car and he's turning the wheels, and straight away they go to the representational object rather than, oh yeah, that moves, which
Mhm.
is the perceptual quality that he's exploring. And so I then had a chat to his parents around there's something in this for him. So I was trying to follow his lead, but I was feeling a bit stuck. I was like, how do I help him find more adaptive capacity here in terms of his praxis? Because he really doesn't know what to do with his toys, and his mum's like, doesn't know how to play, and so it's a goal. Like, I'm trying to think, how do I help him here, because he's stuck on just the spinning component of many of the toys that he has. I'd had a chat to Tracy about this, and I was like, okay, I feel like I might be able to offer some support here. And so I talked to the parents, and there's something in this that he's interested in and trying to figure out. And I kind of tried to help them come back to the fact that these things move and spin, and let's give him lots of ways to move and spin things. Like, let's find all the toys in the house that move and spin, and let's explore this with him. And I was like, he needs to sort of figure this out as a thing so that it can become the next thing. Until he figures out that these things move and spin, he can't then move to, oh, I could push it, which is a new action, and it could roll, which is a different affordance, but it's kind of based on that spinning quality. So then they did that, and then recently, like, he started pushing and rolling the ball to us, and so that was really exciting because it was sort of the first time I really knew what to do with that, kind of as a I guess a developmental thing that sometimes happens, and being able to follow his lead appropriately rather than what I had probably previously done, which was, again, try to go to the representational whole object with the child and see if I can get them to join me in that, when what their need and lead that I should have followed was the fact that they were perceptually trying to figure out a quality of an object. Now, I don't always get it that neat and tidy in terms of what perceptual quality are they trying to explore, because sometimes you can't always figure out what is it that they're actually trying to figure out in the activity that they're doing. So but that was so helpful.
Can I just jump in? Because in that decision making, we've all had similar cases, I guess, where they may know that the new affordance is that becomes a thing that moves on the ground, and it moves on the ground in different ways. So then they start, pushing the things on those spinning things, pushing a car or vehicles in multiple ways, but they may still at certain times pick up the object and start rotating those spinning things again. For me, that then shows that, do you know what? In part, this was an affordance issue, but in part, it's also a thing that they're curious about that might be self-soothing, that perception of, their eyes following the spinning thing or their fingers tapping repetitively the wheel might have some quality there that is regulating for them. And then, it's got two functions for them. It might have, what started first, who knows, that it became a visual thing of interest or a tactile thing of interest that evolved into, oh, that thing can move to a car. But when they keep coming back to that perceptual thing, then, you've answered another question. Then it's like, oh, it's got two functions for you. And once you've had the first one of them answered, the affordance component, it still meets your need as being of interest, curiosity that might be self-regulating.
100%.
It's so
I did
true.
have one thing, though, I wanted you to unpack with me, Tracy, which was in the back of my mind. So I've have one component is I'm thinking about his need around the perceptual quality of spinning objects, and I'm wondering in treatment how I can help satiate that or enhance that so that he can actually figure that out. And then the other piece that you had talked about was, because it was transferring across many things, so the fluttering of leaves, spinning of objects, like any particular flickering or movement. So the second piece in my mind was the sensory integration element of the visual vestibular kind of, I guess, integration around the particular perceptual. So I wanted you to help sort of unpack that, Tracy, because I wouldn't not do it as articulately as you, it's probably not a word, but I think you'll be more helpful to articulate that than I will.
Yeah, so it's another level of kind of the foundation, if you will, of affordance is perception, and the foundation of perception is sensory discrimination. And one of the important sensory discrimination functions that comes online in the first, really solidifies in the first year of life, is this visual vestibular function, where if my body's moving and something out there is moving, I sort of know that I'm still and the thing is moving, or the thing is still and I'm the thing moving. So you get this differentiation where there's this stability field that comes from the vestibular ocular reflex integrating. And as that really comes together, it starts the foundation of our sense of self and our sense of self and other, and our sense of self in the environment. And so it's based in the vestibular function, and actually a very specific vestibular discrimination function. So we have a lot of kids where, as the next layer of development gets a little complex for them, whatever that is, maybe it's upright and reaching out into space, eyes reaching from midline out into lateral space can sometimes challenge that. And what'll happen is anything that catches your eye, or anything that actually moves in the periphery, can start to become a little bit disintegrative, if you will. So we all have to go through this process, and really you feel it at different times. Like even recently, I had a little virus that hung around for a bit, and I had a cold, and I had some pressure in my head. And I noticed when I was driving that I was having a lot more of that kind of like, wait, did I stop, or is the car next to me moving? You know, that little vertigo-y kind of vestibular function. And it was really just from the pressure in my head, but I had to pay really careful attention when I stopped the car. Like, I am stopped. I had to like take a breath and land that for a moment. So imagine if you're developing and you walk by a thing like a revolving door, you really cannot tell what's happening. If you walk by a fence that has many slats and the light changes as you go by it, it will catch you, and you will have to walk by it 50 times or 5,000 times to sort what is that. And if we restrict kids from having the experience of sorting it, then what happens is that then becomes dysregulating. It's like, wait a second, this is a basic thing. That person was holding a ball and they opened their hand and it didn't drop. I am curious about that. Gravity should function. So if I walk by the light and it catches my eye and I can't sort where's the light coming from, is it the light? Is it the fence? Is it me? Is it that? What is it? That curiosity is like a precursor to understanding language, to understanding representational thinking, to understanding how the world works. And the child's curiosity around that needs to be supported. We have to help them to be like, yeah, what is that? And I'm going to, make the shadow change and be like, wow, what's happening here? And I'm going to follow the child's lead and follow their need in that moment and help them to fill that knowledge bucket that's coming from not cognitive knowledge. It's experiential, sensory motor based, embodied experience of curious understanding of how all these properties work. So affordances are properties. And for a lot of our kids, they just have a need to understand those basic affordances. What's shiny, what's not shiny, what's pick upable, what's not pick upable, what's squishable, what's not, what's movable, what's not, what's pushable, what's not, what can my hand do versus my fingers do. All of those properties of my body affordance are interacting with the qualities of the objects out in the world. And those objects that move in particular are deeply fascinating and hard to understand until you get enough of a schema about them.
Yeah, amazing. I wanted to be able to do both of those things for him in following the clues that he was giving me around the needs that he might have and following his lead. So I was trying to help his parents recognize, let's come back to the perceptual qualities of these things. Let's kind of enhance that for him. Let's allow him many opportunities to just look and experience and do that. But also I was working on his vestibular discrimination, body awareness functions as well in my sessions, because I want him to figure out where am I and where is the environment, and help him sort of discern that in a way that's useful to him, especially in relation to the way that he's trying to reference across space and the way that he uses his eyes. And anytime something moves too close to him in any sort of speed, it doesn't even have to be fast, it gives him a shock because he's not able to track the objects of space coming towards him. So all of these things are like, okay, let me also work on that as a clinician, because that is really where my job is. Like, I really need to help you with this. This is where my training is really useful to you, mum and dad, because that's not something everybody learns. And that really, I would do him a disservice if I didn't observe that and try to address that in my clinical sessions. So, the parents can easily, I can help them with unpacking the perceptual qualities and the affordances that maybe he's interested in exploring. And then they can run with that. But sometimes the vestibular piece and targeting that is trickier, especially when you have individual differences in parents that can't spin, or for whatever reason, you don't want to throw them into the deep end around experiences that may not be very enjoyable to their nervous system. But so, I was doing that piece and sort of just holding him against me, spinning with him, stopping, and then orienting and catching and saying, yeah, we were spinning, and then just bopping him against my leg with a bit of rhythm to get probe through the spine, basically, to try and be like, here you are, we're back again. Now let's give a little more input into different receptor. Let's come back, reorganize around the midline. Let's go again. So that's kind of the two parts that I was thinking about in my treatment for him. But I'm curious as well, Michelle, about your little kid. I mean, you only assessed him last week, but yeah, just any other thoughts you might have had around treatment for him, or what might be going on in that space and following his lead. And
yeah, I guess I don't necessarily want to deep dive into the particular child, but just this concept to follow the child's need is just one that starts from the moment they walk in the door, or you're gathering information from the family and you're starting this process of getting to know them, to really intimately know what's happening for you across all your domains and how does it come together, and for the purpose of me really understanding you and then being able to share that with all the people around you so you feel felt and seen wherever you go. And that, that's our want, that everybody kind of feels felt. And then the next level for me is, I'm as greedy as the best of them, is what's coming up first, what's interrupting you the most, that really constant watching and making a hypothesis about what's happening for the child, working out where will I go in, where does it feel right. We use the spirit model to help us really make a very detailed map about the child's individual differences, and then based on my individual differences and preferences, we'll really work out where am I going to go first. I guess it's the underlying principle of what we're doing in the moment.
Following the need.
Yeah. So we were following the audience's need by doing a topic like this. And it was really fun to talk this over with you. I did want to say from the very start of this episode, we said, where did that come from? And Corey, you mentioned that, it came from so many places. I honestly don't really know, but I do know you read it in the Hannon literature for speech and language therapists. I've heard it forever in the early childhood literature, just generally. So in most early childhood educational philosophies, it's often embedded there. Certainly, air sensory integration has a particular bent on following the child's lead, and the DIR floor time approach, and Dr. Greenspan, would often talk about it. I think even more than Dr. Weir would talk about it. It's also kind of centric to those early infant mental health days that Dr. Greenspan was trained in with the Brazelton group and different folks like that were talking about it. But then I really don't know where it comes from, but I did see that it also, Maria Montessori, who predates all of those people, it was actually a principle in that educational model that she developed.
Yeah.
And I always
surprise me.
remember, that she developed that approach for really targeted working with kids that had special needs and especially intellectual disability. So there's a wisdom to it that probably goes way back before that. And I don't know the whole history of it, but I find it interesting that we find it in all the disciplines. There is a wisdom to it you can come to trust and rely on, but it is informed. And that's been fun to kind of hash out with you guys today.
Yeah.
Awesome.